38 clipboards moved through the second-floor corridor of Ash Grove Regional Medical Center before a single person on the patient benefits staff thought to ask who had sent them. The sound was not loud, the opposite of loud. 41 pairs of shoes, moving in 2 columns with the particular coordination of people who had been briefed, had read the file and knew exactly where they were going. The receptionist at the front desk looked up. A clerk who had been sorting authorization letters looked at the hallway and then at the ceiling, the way people do when something is happening that they don't yet have a category for. The inspectors did not stop at the front desk. They had already been in contact with the front desk. And then the woman in the gray cardigan walked in behind them. She was 32, with a face that cameras didn't catch correctly, not because it was unremarkable, but because whatever was most present in it was too quiet for a still image to register. She carried a manila folder and moved the way she always moved, unhurried, covering ground without appearing to try. The inspectors she passed didn't stop for her, but something in the formation shifted when she came through the entrance. A subtle collective adjustment. Several heads turned, not the tense turn of subordinates tracking a superior. Something quieter than that. Recognition. The head of the Patient Benefits and Claims Review Office was standing in his doorway with his hand on the handle. His mouth was slightly open. She had looked at him the same way at 9:15 that morning, when she had been sitting in one of his plastic chairs with the folder on her lap. The morning had started the way bad mornings often do, quietly, without any external signal that it would be what it was. Cecily Morse woke at 5:40 because her alarm didn't go off, and her body had learned not to trust sleep the way most people learn not to trust certain roads in certain conditions. She showered, started coffee, and checked the receiver on the kitchen counter where Piper's CGM readings transmitted overnight. The numbers were steady. They were almost always steady now, which was the whole point of the monitor. Piper was 14 and had been managing type 1 diabetes since she was 9. The continuous glucose monitor wasn't elective equipment. It was the reason Piper's A1C had gone from alarming to manageable in 2 years. The reason Piper made the track team. The reason Cecily had gradually stopped sitting on the edge of her daughter's bed at 2 in the morning running calculations in her head about what the body was doing and whether it was doing it correctly. 3 weeks ago, the annual renewal for the CGM sensor supplies had been denied. The letter used language that Cecily read twice before setting it on the counter. Elective monitoring technology with available lower-cost alternatives. She stood in the kitchen for approximately 30 seconds before she picked up the phone and called the insurance line and was told she would need to dispute the classification in person with the hospital's claims coordinator. She made an appointment for the following Thursday. What she did in the evenings between the denial letter and the appointment was not something she mentioned to Piper. Lane Burkett ran the patient benefits office with the particular efficiency of a man who had been in the position long enough to believe he had encountered every variation of the problem that could walk through his door. He was 51. His desk held a framed certificate from a regional insurance industry conference, positioned so visitors would see it before they saw him. He looked at Cecily's folder. He looked at her. He looked at the folder again. "Continuous glucose monitoring," he said. "Your daughter is on this system. For 2 years, her outcomes have improved significantly." He tilted his head at his screen. The renewal request was coded under a DME classification that requires documented pre-authorization under the updated policy pathway. Your physician's submission didn't follow the updated process. He paused. "There's also a signature date discrepancy in the authorization documentation that I'm going to need to flag." The word flag landed in a specific way. "What discrepancy?" Cecily said. "The dates on your physician's renewal authorization and your original prescription record don't align in a way that's consistent with a routine clinical encounter sequence." She looked at him steadily. "You're referring to the 48-hour processing lag in your submission portal. The timestamp on the authorization reflects when your office received it, not when Dr. Tran signed it. That delay is built into the system your office uses. It's in your own technical documentation." Burkett's expression shifted, not dramatically, a slight recalibration. I'll need to verify the portal specifications. Of course, but I want to be clear about what you're describing when you say discrepancy. You're describing your own system's processing delay as an inconsistency in my daughter's physician's documentation. She set 3 pages on his desk: A1C records from 24 months, the endocrinologist's letter, ADA clinical guidelines for pediatric CGM use. This is the outcome documentation. The renewal is clinically supported. He looked at the pages without touching them. This doesn't address the pre-authorization pathway issue. The pathway changed without direct notification to existing patients. We received the annual benefits summary. The requirement exists regardless of. The supplies cost $412 a month without coverage. She said it without inflection, the way she stated any relevant data point. Piper does not have an equivalent alternative. She is 14. Her physician has documented medical necessity. Burkett set his pen down. Mrs. Morse, I understand the situation feels urgent, but what I'm authorized to determine is whether the documentation meets the technical requirements for the classification. In this case, it doesn't. I'm also going to need to flag this file for our compliance team, given the authorization discrepancy. Compliance. The word was a specific kind of accusation dressed in process language. Cecily sat with the particular stillness of someone who has been in enough rooms like this one to know that what she did in the next 30 seconds would matter. She thought about the folder her daughter had watched her organize the night before. She thought about Piper asking, across the kitchen table, whether it was going to be straightforward. She thought about everything she had spent the previous 4 evenings looking at on her laptop after Piper went to bed, and what she had found, and what she had done with it. She thought about all the things she chose not to say. Take whatever time you need, she said. I'll wait. She texted a 2-word message to a number she had sent 1 message to before in the past week. Then she sat in the plastic chair with her folder on her lap and waited. She was still waiting 17 minutes later when the sound in the hallway changed. Burkett looked up from his screen. Through the glass partition, his staff was looking toward the corridor. He walked to his door and opened it. 38 state health oversight inspectors moved through the hallway in 2 columns, CMS lanyards, clipboards. The quiet efficiency of people who had been briefed, had read the file, and knew exactly where they were going. At the end of the formation, a woman with a headset was speaking at a low register into a device that was not a standard office phone. The staff stepped back, not because anyone told them to, because the body knows when it is in the presence of something outside its usual categories. 2 inspectors broke from the formation and moved toward Burkett's department's filing room. A 3rd positioned herself at the front desk. The woman with the headset stopped outside Burkett's office door. Cecily walked in from the lobby. She stopped in Burkett's doorway. He looked at her and apparently could not find where he wanted to go next. Mr. Burkett. She looked past him at the office, at her folder still on his desk. I filed a patient care concern with the State Health Oversight Office last night, when I confirmed that Piper's claim had been suspended on the basis of a system processing delay that your own documentation describes as standard procedure. She stepped inside. I also submitted a request for an audit of CGM claim denials from this office over the past 18 months. The data I had access to suggested a pattern. She sat down. The quality of her sitting down had the same settled authority as it had earlier, more grounded than anything he was doing standing up. You filed before you came in this morning, Burkett said. I filed when I confirmed the pattern. Coming in today was still necessary. Your claim still needed to be processed in person. She opened the folder and placed a typed document on his desk, not the clinical records. A summary she had pulled from CMS publicly accessible data, cross-referenced with the denial codes in her own claim correspondence. 31 accounts. CGM claims denied by this office in the past 18 months under the same classification code used to deny Piper's coverage. 31 patients with documented type 1 diagnoses. Burkett looked at the page. He did not touch it. That denial rate is 6 times the state average for comparable facilities, she said. I've spent 10 years in federal public health. I know what a cluster looks like. I know the difference between statistical variation and a systematic pattern. She let that sit for one moment. The concern I filed was not about my daughter's claim specifically. It was about what the data shows. His desk phone rang. The office landline, the kind of ring institutional phones make when something has shifted. He looked at it. He looked at her. He picked it up. He listened for approximately 50 seconds. The color left his face in stages, not all at once. The way certainty leaves, slowly, then completely. His posture changed. His hands went flat on the desk in a way that suggested he was focusing on keeping them there. He said, "Yes, I understand." Then, after a pause, "Yes." His voice had lost the performance in it. What remained was flat and functional. He set the phone down and looked at the wall 3 feet to the left of her face. "Process the claim," Cecily said. "Full coverage, retroactive to the denial date. Cancel the compliance flag. Remove the reference to the authorization discrepancy." "Yes," Burkett said. His keyboard clicked. Through the glass partition, one inspector was already at a filing cabinet that a staff member was opening under direction. The woman with the headset had positioned herself directly outside the office door. The outer staff had stopped pretending to work. They were watching the way people watch when something outside the ordinary parameters of their day is happening at close range. "I'll need the complete claim records for all 31 accounts," Cecily said, "not summaries, the original documentation." He started to say something about authorization requirements. She set a second document on his desk. State letterhead. The signature belonged to someone who outranked him by enough that he recognized the weight of it without having to calculate. He looked at the document for a moment. Then he looked at the list of 31 claim numbers. He had the specific expression of a man who had been running a process for 18 months and was now understanding at one specific moment exactly what that process had been doing and to whom. Cecily looked at the desk and said what she had come to say. "My daughter has a chronic condition she has been managing since she was 9 years old. She is careful. She is consistent. She does what her medical team asks of her, and what they have asked of her for 2 years includes a monitoring system that has measurably improved her health. She kept her voice level the way she kept it in situations where the room needed to hear the fact rather than the emotion around the fact. You flagged her physician's documentation as inconsistent on the basis of a processing delay your own system creates. You used the word compliance when describing a 14-year-old's coverage file." She looked at him. "There are 30 other families in this county in the same situation. Some of them probably didn't come back." He did not look at her. "Process the claim," she said again. "Then we can talk about the others." The reversal took 11 minutes. He printed the authorization confirmation, initialed it, sent a digital copy to the coverage coordinator, and placed the printed version on the edge of the desk, facing her without looking up. She looked at it. She looked at him. "The formal apology," she said, "in writing. Acknowledging that the denial was issued in error, that the authorization discrepancy was a mischaracterization of system processing function, and that Piper's coverage has been restored in full." He drafted it on the office letterhead while she waited. When he slid it across, she read it, confirmed it was accurate, and placed it in the folder with the clinical records and the data summary and the state oversight document in the particular order she had organized everything in when she built the folder the night before. She stood. Outside the glass partition, 2 inspectors were collecting documents from a filing cabinet. A third was reviewing the intake log at the front desk. The department had gone very still in the way offices go still when the ordinary structure of the day has been replaced by something that requires a different kind of attention. Burkett watched all of it from behind his desk. He looked like a man who had just understood the full dimensions of something he had not seen clearly before, and was now seeing it all at once. "The 31 files," Cecily said from the doorway. "End of business." She walked back into the corridor, and the inspector with the headset looked at her with the small specific nod that passes between people who have done serious work in difficult conditions and know how to communicate without excess. Piper was waiting in the lobby, backpack at her feet, because Cecily had called an hour in and asked her to get a ride from her friend's mother and wait downstairs. She looked up when she saw Cecily come through the door. It worked, she said, not a question. Coverage restored, retroactive. Your next shipment processes under the new cycle. Piper let out a breath. Not dramatic, just real. The specific exhale of someone for whom this particular piece of information had been sitting on their chest for 3 weeks. There's more, Cecily said. I'll explain in the car. Outside, the afternoon was flat and gray in the way Midwestern October afternoons commit to nothing. Piper looked at the 2 state vehicles that hadn't been in the parking lot when she arrived, at the inspector visible through the lobby glass, reviewing something at the reception desk, at the general sense of institutional weight that had settled over a building that had been, 2 hours ago, doing an ordinary Thursday. Mom, she said, how many people did you call? Cecily thought about the evenings at the kitchen table, the data she had pulled, the pattern she had seen the second night when the numbers became too specific to explain away. The call she had made on the third night to a contact she still had from her time with the Oversight Coordination Office, who had listened and asked 3 precise questions and then told her what to file and where. The relevant number is 31, she said. That's how many families had their CGM claims denied by that office in the past 18 months. Piper was quiet for a moment. Then you filed before you even went in. I filed when I confirmed the pattern, yesterday afternoon. You were going to go in regardless. Your claim still needed to be processed in person. Cecily unlocked the car, but yes, the 2 things were separate tracks. Piper got in and sat with her backpack on her lap. How did you know he was going to do something wrong? The denial letter used language inconsistent with our policy terms. The code they cited has a denial rate in this office that's 6 times the state average for comparable facilities. When something doesn't explain itself in isolation, I look for whether it explains itself as part of a pattern. She started the car. It's a habit from an old job. The formal audit findings came 3 weeks later, in an email from Inspector Audrey Tolman, whose office had been processing institutional failures for long enough that her correspondence had the particular economy of someone who believed in specificity over sympathy. 34 denied claims, not 31. 3 additional files had surfaced in the deeper records pull. Of the 34 patients, 12 had filed appeals, all denied. 8 had stopped pursuing coverage and were paying out of pocket. 2 had experienced documented medical complications during the period when their monitoring had been disrupted. Cecily read those 2 lines standing at the kitchen counter and then sat down. Piper came home an hour later, still in her track clothes, Cecily told her. Piper sat across the table and was quiet for a long moment. What kind of complications? She asked. 1 hospitalization, 1 emergency room visit. Cecily looked at her daughter, at the sensor on her arm, at the receiver clipped to her backpack, numbers steady and readable, both under clinical review to determine whether they were directly caused by the loss of monitoring. Piper looked at the receiver. She had the specific understanding of a person who had been living with this condition for 5 years, who knew in her body what the numbers meant and what happened when they moved in directions that weren't caught in time. They wouldn't have ended up there, she said, if they'd had their supplies. Probably not. The review will determine that formally. Piper was still for a moment. Were they kids? The audit doesn't include patient ages in the summary. She didn't ask anything else. She sat at the table, and Cecily could see her processing it in the particular quiet way she processed large things. Not shutting down, just needing a moment before the edges of something that size could be managed. It was 17 days after the audit findings when Cheryl Rayford called. She introduced herself as the mother of a boy named Marcus, 11 years old, type 1 since he was 6, denied 14 months ago, 2 appeals denied. 8 months of fingerstick monitoring alone. 4 to 6 checks a day. The method that worked but did not work the same way. The method that required Marcus to wake up twice each night to test because there was no continuous signal, no alert, no quiet ongoing accounting of what his body was doing between checks. He was the patient in the hospitalization record. Cheryl wasn't angry when she called. That was the first thing Cecily noticed. She was tired and she was careful. And she said the oversight office had told her she could contact the person who had filed the original complaint if she had questions. How is he now? Cecily asked. Better. Coverage came back 2 weeks ago. He started the new sensors on Monday. A pause. He was scared to put them back on. He thought they'd take them away again. Cecily held the phone. The kitchen window was showing late afternoon light, and the room was very quiet. I'm sorry it took this long, she said. I'm sorry I didn't find the pattern sooner. You couldn't have, Cheryl said. You weren't looking at his claim. You were looking at your daughter's. Yes, but you looked farther than you had to. Cecily thought about how to answer that honestly. When something doesn't make sense in isolation, I look for whether it makes sense as part of a cluster. It became a reflex a long time ago. It didn't stop being a reflex when I left the work. Cheryl made a sound that was close to a laugh but wasn't quite. Useful reflex, she said. For Marcus, for all of them. The compliance hearing was 3 days, and Cecily submitted a written statement that she drafted at the kitchen table over 2 evenings while Piper did homework across from her, in the same way she had built the original folder. She did not write about Burkett's expression when his phone rang, or about 38 inspectors moving through a corridor in 2 quiet columns. She wrote about the data. She wrote about what a denial rate 6 times the state average means when you understand how rates work and what they describe. She wrote about 2 patients whose documented medical events were consistent, temporally and clinically, with the loss of continuous glucose monitoring during the denial period. She wrote 1 additional paragraph. She almost removed it and then kept it. She wrote that she had spent a decade in field epidemiology identifying the distance between what systems said they were doing and what they were actually doing, in contexts where that distance was measured in illness. She wrote that those instincts did not remain in the field when the field work ended. They became part of the way she moved through any room, any process, any document that did not hold together the way it said it should. She wrote that she did not think this was unusual for people who had done serious work for long enough. She wrote that she thought it was worth naming as a fact, because the fact mattered when trying to understand why a pattern that had existed for 22 months had been identified in the way it was identified, and by whom. She submitted it on a Tuesday. The following Thursday, she picked Piper up from practice, and they stopped for food on the way home and did not discuss it. The compliance findings arrived 10 days after the hearing. Lane Burkett, formal reprimand, permanent removal from Primary Claims Review Authority, mandatory retraining. The denial pattern across 34 accounts was characterized as systematic and inconsistent with stated policy application standards. The 2 patients with documented medical complications were referred to a separate review process for potential redress. The Patient Benefits Office was placed under enhanced oversight with quarterly reporting requirements for 2 years. All 34 claims, coverage restored. Tolman sent the findings summary with a single line. Thought you'd want to see this directly. Cecily read it at the kitchen table. Piper's name was first on the corrected accounts list, as it had been since the beginning. Piper came in from her room and read it without being asked. 34, she said. Yes. He won't run the same process again. The oversight structure makes it significantly harder. The reporting requirements will catch it earlier. Cecily set the document down. Whether they would have caught it without what happened, I can't say. These systems are supposed to self-correct. They don't always. Piper nodded slowly. She was looking at the list of names. 34 lines of corrective language in the flat official type of institutional accountability, each one representing a claim that had been wrong and was now, formally, on record as wrong. You filed the complaint before you went in, she said, before you even knew how bad it was going to be in that room. I filed when I confirmed the pattern. But you didn't know he was going to use the word compliance about Dr. Tran's documentation. You didn't know he was going to do it in front of you the way he did. No. You did it anyway. Cecily looked at her daughter. When the data supports it, you file. You don't wait to confirm the behavior. Waiting for confirmation is the same as accepting it. Piper turned the document over. The back was blank. She turned it face up again. You said once that the part you miss is when the thing you identified and the thing that was actually happening turn out to be the same thing. Yes. Piper looked at her. Is this one of those times? Cecily thought about Marcus putting on new sensors on a Monday after 8 months without them, about 34 names on a corrected list, about Cheryl Rayford on the phone, careful and tired, saying, "You looked farther than you had to." She thought about what she had believed strength looked like for a long time. The kind that carried things without showing the weight. The kind that kept the difficult information in a separate room, organized and labeled and out of view. She had organized her entire life around that version. She had told herself it was protection, and some of it had been, and some of it had been something else, the specific loneliness of being the only person in the room who knew what the room was actually holding. What had changed things was not that. What had changed things was filing the complaint the night before the meeting, pulling the data when other people had moved on, going into a claims office on a Thursday morning with a folder that had handwritten tabs and 31 names behind it, and the training to understand exactly what 31 names at a 6 times average denial rate actually described. Visibility was the thing. Accurate, documented, on-record visibility. The willingness to put the true version into the system rather than accepting the managed version, even when the managed version would have been faster and quieter and would have gotten Piper's sensors back without any of the rest of it. Yes, Cecily said, this is one of those times. Piper folded the document carefully along its existing crease and set it on the table between them. Outside, the October light was doing what it does in the late afternoon in the Midwest when the clouds finally break and everything goes briefly, specifically golden, before the season moves on. Thank you, Piper said. Not for any particular piece of it, for all of it. For the folder and the 4 evenings at the kitchen table and the complaint filed before the meeting and the 10 years of learning how to look at a pattern until you could see the whole shape of it. Cecily looked at her daughter, at the sensor on her arm, at her steady eyes, at the receiver on her backpack, showing numbers that were exactly where they were supposed to be, and thought that this was what the work had always actually been. Not the conferences, or the field deployments, or the federal coordination meetings. This, someone you loved, numbers that told the truth, the decision to make the accurate version the one that was on record. That was enough. It had always been enough. You're welcome, Cecily said.